All right, hi everybody. We are going to go over the Cool It New York State Science Lab. I'm going to be reading the student directions to you and kind of giving a brief overview. So on the very first page, you should be writing your name, date, period. Remember, New York State has to be able to read this, so that should be an automatic on there. Student directions. Focus question. How do the type of matter, the mass of matter, and the temperature change of matter affect the amount of heat energy transferred by a sample of matter within a closed system? Purpose of investigation. You will work in pairs to analyze data sets to determine how the type of metal and the initial temperature of the metal, when placed in room temperature water, affects the amount of heat energy transferred within the system. You will also plan and conduct an investigation in pairs to gather data to be used as evidence to identify how changing the mass of heated metal objects affects the amount of heat energy transferred when placed into room temperature water. The materials that you will need per group. So the first thing that you would need is one insulated cup with a lid, one Celsius thermometer, one 100 milliliter plastic graduated cylinder, and then we need our heated metal washers. So we have a big bag. Each group would probably only need at maximum 4. Then we would need one 2-liter plastic bottle filled with room temperature water with the cap, a calculator, and then 2 to 3 paper towels, just in case we make a mess. All right, on to page number 2, the procedure for part 1. Write your name on the student answer packet. Read passage 1 below, which describes an investigation involving energy transfer of 3 different metals. Data table 1, type of metal, on your answer packet, shows the data that was recorded from this experiment. So the passage that we're about to read covers the information that we see in our student activity packet number 1. So all of this information was gathered from this experiment that we're going to read right now. So passage 1. A student wanted to conduct an experiment to see if the same amount of heat energy is transferred when different metals heated to the same temperature are placed in room temperature water. The student knows that when hot metals are placed in room temperature water, the temperature of the water will increase due to energy being transferred. The student began the investigation by measuring out 50 milliliters of room temperature water and placing it in an insulated cup. The temperature of the water was measured and recorded, 20 degrees Celsius. A 20-gram sample of aluminum was heated to 200 degrees Celsius. The aluminum was then placed into the room temperature water and covered with a lid. A thermometer was placed through the lid opening. The temperature of the water was recorded when it stopped increasing. The water and the metal are now at the same temperature. Calculations of the change in temperatures were performed for the metal and again for the water using the following formula. Change in temperature equals final temperature minus the initial temperature. 2 more trials, including calculations, were done using the same metal. Next, copper was investigated to see how much energy was transferred. Everything in the procedure remained the same, except a 20-gram sample of copper was used instead of aluminum. Data for 3 trials using the copper were collected. The experiment procedure was repeated with a third metal, a 20-gram sample of iron. Data for the 3 trials of each of the 3 metals are shown in data table 1. So number 3 says, on your answer packet, below data table 1, make a claim using quantitative data as evidence about the relationship between the type of metal and the amount of energy transferred. Remember that in this investigation, the change in temperature of water is directly related to the amount of energy transferred. All 3 metals must be included in your claim. So we have at this time already discussed this. So looking at our chart, a good summary of what our answer could be would be right here. Okay. A potential answer. Okay. Some potential things you could have written. The aluminum transferred the most amount of energy because the temperature of the water increased about 14 degrees Celsius. followed by iron because the temperature of the water increased about 8 degrees Celsius, and the copper transferred the least energy because the water only increased about 6 degrees Celsius. So something along those lines, because if we're looking at the packet, we can see the different changes in temperature, and you should have analyzed that in your answer. So moving on. Okay, so now we're on to number 2, and this is on page number 3. Well, number 4 on page number 3. Read passage 2 below, which describes an investigation involving the effect of the starting temperature of a metal on the amount of energy transferred. Data table 2, initial temperature of copper on your answer packet, shows the data from this experiment. So we've already looked at data table 1, so you turn the page. Data table 2, which is on the second page, is what we're referring to now. Another student wanted to investigate if the same amount of energy is transferred when the same metal, heated to different temperatures, is placed in room temperature water. 50-gram samples of copper were heated to different initial temperatures, so 200 degrees Celsius, 150 degrees Celsius, and 100 degrees Celsius. The procedure the student followed was the same as the procedure followed in passage 1, using the same amount of room water temperature, 50 milliliters, at 20 degrees Celsius. Data for the 3 trials of each sample of copper heated to different initial temperatures are shown in data table 2. So after reading this, it says on your answer packet below, data table 2, make a claim using quantitative data as evidence about the relationship between metal heated to different initial temperatures and the amount of energy transferred. So what you would be doing is on page number 2, you'd be making that claim. And your claim can say something along the lines of, the greater the initial temperature of the metal, the greater the amount of energy transferred, because copper with an initial temperature of 200 degrees Celsius changed the temperature of the water about 15 degrees Celsius, and the copper with an initial temperature of 100 degrees Celsius only raised the temperature of the water about 7 degrees Celsius. So something just comparing those two metals, their starting temperature, and then how the energy transferred was different depending on their starting temperature. So moving on to our next step, it says you will now be planning and conducting an experiment to determine if changing the mass of a heated metal by changing the number of washers when placed in room temperature water will affect the amount of energy transferred on the investigation template on your answer packet. So this is when we filled out basically what we're going to do, the plan for our investigation. Write your experiment plan using the following criteria and constraints. Criteria: your investigation must include a description of the purpose of the investigation, a prediction about the amount of energy transferred and the mass of a sample of matter, including an explanation of the reasoning for this prediction, a description of the data to be collected including units, identification of the data that provides evidence to support a claim about the relationship between the amount of energy transferred and the mass of a sample of matter. Details of the experimental conditions, independent and dependent variables, and controls or variables kept constant that will allow the appropriate data to be collected to address the purpose of the investigation. A step-by-step procedure that must be focused on the purpose of the investigation and be specific enough so that another group of your classmates can conduct exactly the same experiment by reading your procedure. So that means when you write it, other people should be able to read it. A data table with the appropriate headings and units. Data table 3 is a template you can fill out and use, or you can create your own. Test of at least 2 different values for the independent variable and 3 trials of each. The constraints. You are limited to the materials at your station and the washers and the boiling water provided by your teacher. Room temperature water must be used with a volume between 60 milliliters and 100 milliliters per trial. Make sure to use enough water to cover all the washers. A maximum of 4 metal washers per trial can be used during this investigation. The initial temperature of the washers will be 100 degrees Celsius since the washers will be taken from the boiling water. Each student needs to write the investigation plan on their own separate packet. So this is very important. So once you have done this, it says on the investigation checklist on your answer packet, fill out part 1, planning the investigation, to make sure all parts of your plan for your investigation have been completed. So you have your step-by-step, and then making sure that you've hit every part. So that is a summary of part 1 for the Cool It Lab. We are going to go over part 2, which is the actual experiment, in the next video.